In a world where extreme competition exists everywhere, what does it take to have success in your career and in life? Join me, Nirvana Chaudhary, as I sit down with some of the most successful individuals to discover the secrets to their success, what continues to drive them, and to hear a few exclusive stories in the process. What drives them and their success code, their mantra for making it bigger. Hello everyone, I'm back again with my podcast Making It Bigger. Today I have with me a fellow young global leader, founder and CEO of an urban development company who focuses on transit-oriented developments, township developments, urban-related infrastructure, so relevant in ASEAN as well as South Asian context. The CEO of Nirvana, a very dear friend, Gareth Wong. Gareth, thank you so much for giving me time to come for this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Nirvana. Thanks for having me.
So Gareth's currently in Singapore, and Gareth, the first question that I always ask all the leaders in the podcast is, what is your success mantra? You've been able to take Nirvana to the next level. You've been part of such successful organization. What is it that really drives you?
Thanks, Nirvana. I think you're too kind. I think success is it's an ongoing journey, right? I think for myself at this stage of life, I would credit that there has been some moderate amount of success in the formation of the entity Nirvana, which is a joint venture between Mitsubishi Corporation from Japan and Sabana Jurong from Singapore. I think the ingredients were right when our two parties came together, and we had this vision of exporting the Japanese and Singapore model of urban developments within the region. We wanted to share our know-how, our technical expertise, and bring these to bear in defining new age transit-oriented developments in ASEAN and South Asia. Right? So that was really, I think the stars were aligned and we were able to form our venture very quickly. I think to a large extent, the opportunity and the right factors need to be there, right? When we are talking about, especially forming partnerships. On a personal note, I think the way I would define success for myself, at least at this point in time, is that I'm very thankful to have a stable family, and I think that's very important, right? It's a motivating factor behind the driving force for business and larger things that we want to do. I think having a bedrock at home is very important.
Absolutely, Gareth. This is one thing which not many leaders actually openly say it, even though it's such an important aspect of their life that if their non-professional life is at peace and is balanced, I think your state of mind is completely different, right? Now, tell me, Gareth, when I was first reading about Nirvana, it just immediately caught my attention because you're talking about Singapore and Japan, who are the leaders in urban development, and your focus and your growth strategy is in markets in South Asia. I mean, very rarely do we come across companies who have that kind of an approach. There was a story where there was a owner of a really big shoe company, and he had two sales guys, and he sent the two sales guys to a very rural area, and one of them came back saying that, "Sir, there's no one here wearing shoes. I don't think there's a market for us." But there's another guy who came back so excited saying, "Sir, there's no one wearing shoes here. Just imagine how much opportunity there is for us to sell the shoes." So I guess it's all about perspective. But what went into your mind when you were looking at markets like Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Nepal? Why these markets, knowing that it is so challenging?
Yeah. Nirvana, I think when we were looking at defining which markets we wanted to enter into, I think, well, firstly, we recognize that Asia is really at the cusp of a new chapter of growth, right? I think the forecast in the next decade or so, we're going to see much more of urbanization coming from Asia, right? Today, we have seen a big push of rural population moving into urban settings. By 2050, we're going to have 70% of our world's population living in cities, and much of that comes from Asia and as well as Africa, right? So I think it's just the dynamism of the economy is that we are seeing, there is a growing middle class. It's huge in South Asia. Retail consumerism is on uptrend. I've been reading a lot about the vibrancy of IPOs. The entire retail securities market is just phenomenal, right? And in Asia alone, we will have not just a big, bountiful population, but that population is also young, right? And being in, I would say, the tail end of the millennial generation, I think both you and I, we can ascribe to and understand that we were transitional in our understanding of the internet, right? When we were first to have the early adoption, and as I see my own kids going through their growth, it's leapfrogging, right? And I feel that is really defining what will be the new wave of the online citizen. Most of Asia, as mobile penetration becomes highly prevalent, it's going to eclipse the growth that even what we have seen in Singapore and Japan, right? The definition of the fourth industrial revolution as we see it is going to be very different from the what propelled growth in the 80s and in the 90s, right? So I think that's just the first baseline, right? The potential opportunity, population, demography, and just the changes in the economies, right? But secondly, at the same time, we see that there's a lot of potential to think about transforming the way we look at urban living in cities, right? Apart from just having large populations, I think, in general, everybody wants to go towards the urban centers, right? Everyone wants to know what is happening in the key cities, in India, Delhi, Mumbai. You're not going to you can't decouple economic growth from urban growth, right? When you look at it, everyone wants to move into better residential districts, And I think when we see what's happened in Singapore and Japan, in the earlier years, everyone wanted to come to the central business district areas to work. Everyone wanted to go to the retail streets. Singapore Orchard Road was the defining area. But over the last few decades, 2 to 3 decades, what has worked for us, especially in Singapore, is the decentralization, right? Moving towards satellite townships, growing new areas, and intensifying urban development in a way that makes sense. We don't have a lot of space, so we had to build upwards and downwards. We had to reclaim land, so we built outwards. But as we look at urban development, especially around the core city central areas, defining how we live around transport centers is going to be critical. Right? We see a lot of potential as the rail network gets better. Right? So we're talking about central MRTs, LRTs, in general, mass people movers. Right? So getting our head around what worked for us is the first step. And the second step is now exporting it and localizing it. So we're very happy to see how we can find suitable partners who have like-minded interests to see how we can do this in the right context.
It's amazing, Gareth. Even for me, living in South Asia, my focus, at least for the next 5-10 years, I see growth in these markets you're talking about right now. You have personally visited most of these emerging markets. Is there anything you've learned from those markets? Because, it's so challenging to work in this environment where there's high risk, but there's higher return and opportunities as well. But you as an individual, is there anything, can you just give me one example, what you've learned from your visits to India or to Sri Lanka or to any other South Asian country?
Yeah, I think in general, I like adventure, right? So I like to see different things from different perspectives. And living in Singapore, which is a multicultural, multiracial society, I think we've had the benefit of learning how to appreciate different cultures from a very early stage, and I think before I embarked on this journey to do urban development, I was in the Singapore military, and I had the opportunity to train overseas, go to different countries, and I was deployed in Afghanistan as well. Right? So, I think as I see what's happening and unfolding, in Afghanistan today, right? And I have a lot more that we could potentially talk about in a different podcast. But the appreciation of history,
Yeah.
culture,
Yeah.
racial requirements, and cultural context, it differs from country to country, right? And I think having that harmony and that common goal to work together is very important, right? I've also spent time in Myanmar, and again, that's again another chapter that's unfolding there. But in every different Asian society, right, I think it's very important to understand that there are different races, but also different dialects, right? Different tribes, different factions, right? And trying to get everybody to work together, it's a challenging task, but it also depends on the right context, right? And sometimes we have to leverage the right opportunities that come up, right? So I think that's a very philosophical approach to thinking about these. It's a very big, hairy subject, right? But what I wanted to say was, I think what helped me was that I just enjoy to see the world. I just like to see things from different contexts, different perspective. And I think it's amazing how when you cross just a single geographical border, things are immensely different, right? Between the different South Asian states. I mean, even just within India alone, when you cross to a different state, there is a different sense, different flavor, different vibe, right? And I think that's what appeals to me. And when we talk about urban development and the places where people live, work, and play, at least historically, from our own anecdotal evidence and what we've seen in development here in the countries that we chose to operate in, it's a very local rooted choice, right? When you set up your family base and you think about where you're going to move to next, it's a very deep entrenched choice, right? Just even within Singapore alone, people who live in the East and the West, it takes a very different perspective for you to want to move, right? Just from where you have been, you've grown up in, and your entire social family support base. So I think that's what appeals to me. That's what draws me, and I think you can learn so much, right? Just from seeing things from different perspectives and lenses. And it's a continuous journey, right, Nirvana? It's always about exploring and knowing that you will never know enough, right? And that's just, I think in the age of the internet, things have become so much more advanced. Information is at your fingertips. But then again, we realize that there's even more that you don't know, right? It's just inexhaustible. And I think that's something that we should all take heart in.
Absolutely, Gareth. That's such an amazing perspective and analogy that you've talked about. My last question, Gareth, is in Singapore, right after your school, you have to go through this 2.5 years of national service. Now, initially, while I got some exposure to Singapore, and I used to think about it. I'm like, 2.5 years of your prime life, spending time in military or army or navy, etc. You're just wasting time in that prime life. But in hindsight today, thinking about it, apart from you learning individually, I think it's a great sense of service you're doing towards your country, right? And today, the more I try to do more and more things, the more compassionate, the more I am wanting to give back to the society or to the country or to whatever I'm doing. How has that national service time, and you've talked about Afghanistan, I'm like, wow. How has that molded or changed you as a person? How important is it that at a young age someone needs to go through that?
No, national service is a very integral part of our society. Right? We've had it for 50 over years now, and it's, I would say, very intertwined with the history of our young nation. Right? Circumstantially, it was because we didn't have a standing army that was sizable enough. When we gained independence, when our forefathers made a very difficult choice, right, to say that every able-bodied man of a certain age has to serve his country, not just from a defense point of view, but also at that point in time, it was to harness society, right? It was to get people to realize that we were in a very critical phase of nation building, right? It was unclear whether we would even have a city-state, or not even just a nation, right, at the end of the exercise. So, but today that has evolved, right? And every generation that serves military, the military in Singapore, I think we can all attest that it is a very good way to break social lines, right? I mean, regardless of your background, you have to serve in the army, right? It brings together people from different walks of life, whereby we go through training, and it's often a very easy topic, right? That breaks the ice, especially between the males, right? On a societal basis, I think it has shaped a lot of what we have, how we integrate defense as a topic, right, into our economic and social fabric. We have a framework called Total Defense today, which embraces not just the military aspect, right, but every other institution that we realize that contributes towards the larger sovereignty and well-being, right, of Singapore as we know it today. And I think the social cost of having males serve 2 years, as you said, previously it was 3, and then 2.5, and now 2. I think it is a very deliberate choice, right? And certainly the time spent, there is an opportunity cost to that. Our males start university later than their peers. But I think the experiences that our different generations go through, it is, I think it's you can't quantify it just from a monetary perspective, right? It shapes people in different ways. I think the economic progress that we witness and the luxuries that we have here in Singapore, it's very easy to take those for granted if we don't have a military training that to some extent toughens up all of our male citizens, right? But I think Nirvana, it's having gone through it myself and having served in a full-time role, I think it trains the mind in a very different way.
Absolutely.
The experiences that we forge when we send our young soldiers overseas as well, when they go for training, those are very defining moments that they carry through. And when we call our soldiers back, right, it's again another time for them to bond. And I think those are social fabric lines, right, which we can't just define from, it's very intangible, right? So I think, now that I have 2 young sons of my own, I'm looking forward to sending them off as well at some stage, because there is that chapter, right, when we say we send our boys to become men, right? So it's at the stage of life, very formative part of our lives. It's the portion where you think you are adult enough, right? And yet you have to be humbled back down to do the very basic things, right? Or even just caring for yourself. And then you realize, maybe this is a very personal experience, but sometimes when you're out in the jungle, whether you're walking in the dark or living in a space where, you never thought you'd be in, you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about what drives you when you're tired, how to manage your emotions, how to deal with a larger good that is more than just your own well-being.
It's absolutely brilliant, Gareth. Especially the national service perspective of how it sort of, again, I remember this quote that like life is like a grinding stone. It either wears you down or polishes you up depending on what you're made up of. And I think that what you just talked about is the key ingredient for you to becoming a much more grounded, much more successful, much more disciplined mind. It's absolutely amazing. Gareth, thank you so much for your time. I really, really enjoyed this podcast. I'm sure a lot of people will be listening to this, will learn a lot from your journey. Lots of love to family, and I hope you and your family are keeping safe. And thank you so much once again.
Thanks, Nirvana. Thanks for having me.